Welcome to this, a very British space program. This is a brand new series on the channel. It's going to be using RP-1, realism overhaul, and a few special little bits that I'm going to throw in myself. I have made some slight modifications and added a few parts just to be in keeping with the British space program at the time, or the rocket program, which came out of their desires. So we're going to see what would have happened if the British had really pushed the idea of going to space and building rockets. Welcome to episode 1. So, as I said, this is going to be a realism progression 1 or RP-1 playthrough, and we're going to be playing as the United Kingdom, or Britain. Britain did actually do a lot of research into rocket technology following the Second World War. In fact, they were actually involved in the firing of 4 V2s following the German surrender, and they actually prepared them and showed them off to the Allies. They also took, like the Americans and the Russians, took components of the V2s with them back to the UK to try and sort of reverse engineer and to use. However, they did something a little different to all the others, because the British, of course, were quite, shall we say, cash-strapped. They saw the engine on the V2, and it had taken a lot of money and time to develop, and they could see that was going to take a lot more effort to work on. So they saw something else that interested them, and that was HTP, high test peroxide. They saw that as their shortcut to rockets. So they developed something called the gamma engine. They actually developed the alpha, beta and delta engine as well, but they developed the gamma engine, and they wanted to basically use that as a shortcut to get into space. And so what we've got a very simple basic gamma engine on this craft that we're preparing. This craft is not yet named, but you notice it's bright red. I have not played the RP-1 game or realism overhaul or anything like that for a long time, so this first craft, me building it, was actually a really interesting experience with a lot of procedural scale things. You'll see the engine on the bottom there. That is a modified engine that I've actually created myself, and it is we're calling it the Gamma 101. It's actually a sort of like a prototype of the original Gamma engines. The original Gamma engine started out with something called the Stenta engine, which was used in a missile, and it evolved into the Gamma engine, which later became the Gamma 2 and the Gamma 8, which actually did go to orbit in the only successful flight of a British-made rocket to orbit to this date. It runs on kerosene and high-test peroxide, so you basically catalyze the high-test peroxide, it produces oxygen, and you burn that with kerosene, or use it to combust the kerosene as your fuel and your oxidizer. It doesn't have a very high specific impulse. However, what it does have is it's quite dense and tightly packed. So this rocket is quite small. So we've named it the Red Maiden. This is because in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, the British actually used a two-word coloured name combination to sort of identify their secret projects in an attempt to try and hide them, because they identified during the Second World War that certain words, when they were repeated in terminology, would actually break ciphers because they'd be quite obvious. So, yeah, let's see what we do with this rocket, shall we? So, one of the big things with RP-1 is that we have to build our rockets, and so we have to give them time to build. And you can see here I'm just rolling forward time. We've gone forward a month or so to build this first rocket, and I've put 2 of them on the pad because I want to test them. And this rocket, we're going to move to the pad, and we're going to see what actually it can do. So this is a bit like your whack corporal, if anybody plays RP-1 or anything like that. And this is the sort of sounding rocket that you would send up. I made a mistake though, and we'll get onto that in but a moment. So here's our first launch. I should probably at this point switch back to probably past me, and he can tell you all about it. Right, so we've staged. We're going to wait for the engine to burn, and then we're away. Come on. So we're turning a little. I don't like the. It shouldn't be turning. It shouldn't. Okay, this might be a moment where I want to use range safety Whoa, okay. Oh, it did it itself almost. Not the most successful of first flights, I don't think. But at least we've done the first flight. At least it's out of the way, and we can fix this. The good thing is the first contract is done, and so we can now get some stuff like altitude and things that get us some more money, I think. Yeah, right. Now, if we look back to the previous piece of footage, you will see that I did not select the first launch contract. So I had to do it again. So we call that launch 0. That didn't happen. That whole situation didn't happen. That doesn't matter. We can move on from there, obviously, because we haven't actually launched anything. So we're going to have to do the whole process again. We've got our rocket there. But I decide actually that yeah, we saw it flipping over, and you'll have heard me talking at the time about it. So I actually modified the tail of this craft, because, and I also checked that it's stable, because what we actually had was we had our basically in effect our center of lift, our air resistance was too heavy at the tip, and it was pushing it over. So we actually need to increase the drag around the tail of the rocket, around the engine. And by putting bigger fins on it, that's what we do. We make it nice and wide. So let's try this again, shall we? All right, let's try number 2. We've selected the contract this time. Let's just try it. So, very good start for the British program. Yeah, okay. This one is turning as well, but it's not as bad. So the tail fins there are actually working really well, I think. It's still turning quite a lot. I would have liked it to go more vertical once it starts to turn. And now I'm worried about the, let's just see, does it have, right, the experiments are running, we're getting science, we're getting quite a bit of science. This is nice actually, this is useful, right, I think it is anyway, is it? Yes, we're getting it, that's it. So I'm not used to Kerbalism, so this is a new experience for me, having to do this. So you can see it transmitting. Okay, so you could actually stop transmission. Okay, we're getting hot actually. This is, oh no, it's cooled down. Oh, that was interesting. We got a bit of a hot spot there. I am ready to turn off the engines should it start to overheat. I think we're done. Right. I think that's it. I can't even tell you that the apoapses, because I have not put any of that data on the screen. I've just realized. So we're getting all this lovely data. We're actually flying over like a giant piece of lake in the middle of Australia that I didn't even realize was there. So if I haven't said in the intro or previously, because I probably cut it out, we're actually launching from Woomera in Australia. So a lot of in fact almost all of the British rocket launches and so forth were carried out in Australia because of the wide open sort of land. A lot of the testing of engines and things that happened in the UK, actually on the coast, either the Isle of Wight, and later on up in Cumbria and places like that, and Northumberland. But actual rocket launches tended to happen down in Woomera. Now, this sounding rocket didn't exist in real life. The Gamma engine was actually primarily used for the Blue Streak missile, which was a nuclear armed missile launched in the end from a Vulcan bomber and some other stuff. But the Gamma engine in this sort of form, where this is going to go, was actually used to form something called the Gamma 201 and the 301, which were used on something called the Black Knight, and that was actually a suborbital vehicle that was used for re-entry testing of warheads, nuclear warheads. A lot of the British program for missile development and rocket development was very much like other countries, led by the idea of the use of atomic weapons. It's important to remember that Britain had pushed very quickly to have atomic weapons, to bring it parity with America, and basically allow it to communicate with them as equals instead of being subordinates, I think primarily because of the idea of empire. As we come through the clouds, and this is it, it's interesting, it's not destroyed itself yet. This is going to be quite a splash at the end, I think. And boom, nothing survives. Good. Oh, vapor in the feed. I think there's more than vapor in the feed lines, but we'll let that off. So yeah, that's our first proper flight. We're not going to count the other one. That wasn't a real test. That was a mock test. That's what it was. it was a simulation that cost us a lot of money and wasted a lot of my time. So that, yes, so I think we'll pass back to future me, and I'll get on with the next one. Right, actually, let's select a mission first before we do that. So we're going to go, we're going to go for the sounding rockets low, and we'll go Kármán line. So Kármán line is 100 kilometers. We'll do for that. So with a little bit more fin on the back of it, we were much more successful. We're still catching a little bit and on launch, and that's a concern. I think it might be a thrust issue. I'm not sure. What you'd actually normally do in a sounding rocket is try and get as much thrust as possible early on, because then you become aerodynamically stable, or you can spin stabilize. So we've added an extra bit of tank on here because these engines can burn for up to about 2 minutes, and we're going to see what actually happens with this. It is a much longer rocket, and so to try and give it that push at the start, I've actually, well, I was thinking about putting on the end of the tips of the things, but we're going to put some little solid rockets on there. Now, the British developed a lot of solid rocket technology. In fact, the Skylark sounding rocket was primarily solid fuel, and it lasted a long time. It was still being used up until 2000s. From that first flight, we got a little bit of science, so we really need to spend that, because another thing with RP-1 is the fact that you need to get your science going quickly and as soon as possible, because it takes time to do your research. I decide in the end that I want to get some planes involved, and I don't want to use the rubbish cockpit, so we're going to use that. So you join us on the pad with the Red Maiden. I think this is the Red Maiden 2A. We're already moving through the numbers here. The engines are warming up. We're just going to launch as quickly as possible. Yeah, nice thrust there. So let's see, that's much straighter. So that thrust on launch is really helped, actually. That is a big bonus. Look at that. That is a much nicer launch there. We're getting the science. That's great. Yeah, this is looking actually very good. I was actually, the first two launches made me think I'd made the right decision in choosing a British space program, but this is very British. It's very upright and upstanding and wonderful. This is about the limit that this engine can do, though. This engine is, I'm calling it the Gamma 101, but it is limited, shall we say? I'm amazed it hasn't actually failed, because it's listed as very high failure rate. It doesn't have the thrust of the later models. It doesn't have the longevity of the later models. Although this engine technically did and didn't exist, it was originally part of the Stentor engine, and so that's the way I've dealt with it. I've dealt with it as the developmental component of the Stentor, and we'll talk about the Stentor probably in the future when we get onto rocket planes. I've put it as quite high failure rate because I consider it, it's very early on. Remember, this is Britain if it had put effort in to actually doing this. The British put some monies and some ideas into this, but traditionally it became the fact that the men and women that worked on these projects, that they had to be very creative in how they dealt with things. The whole sort of peroxide rocket in the first place is actually quite a staggering idea, and it's the cheap and easy way to do this, because they didn't have the money to spend on these things. So we've got engines out, and we have an apoapse that's actually staggering. I did not expect this craft to go that high, so this is a really good sign for us, actually. One of the problems we're going to find is that the British, although they developed the Alpha, the Beta, the Delta and the Gamma engines in parallel, they're all quite different engines. So the Alpha and the Beta were very much sort of missile, I think one of them was a jet assist for takeoff, one was sort of a missile associated engine. The Delta was actually like a Kerosene engine, very much like an LR-101, and I've actually got that in here. I've actually modified or created an engine config for that. I don't think I'm going to be using it though, because it was very rarely used. After all that, you then have the next British engine being sort of the equivalent of the S3, and in that sort of timeline, developed by Rolls-Royce. So we're going to be stuck with the Gamma 101, 201 and 301 for most of the early part of this game and this career. And I think it provides us with the bonuses that the British actually saw in it, which is This rocket holds a lot of fuel, but it's not actually particularly big, and particularly when tankage is such a holdback for you at the early stages where the weight of tanks is quite high. Having this use smaller tanks is a massive bonus for us. However, we're not going to get the bonus that other nations, the Americans and the Russians, get when they get their tank upgrades, because we're using smaller tanks. So it's going to be proportionally less important. We're going to have to get a bit more creative. We also don't have, for example, the XLR-11, the XLR-44, was it, or the Russian, some of the early Russian sort of engines. We don't have that range of engines to use in different ways. So that means that pretty much everything is going to be running on gamma engines for the first 5 years at least, until we'll probably make our attempt on orbit with a gamma engine. Which basically means we're going to be going through bucket loads of peroxide. The interesting thing about peroxide is it's pretty safe to handle. I mean, you don't want to pour it over yourself, but you can wash it off. It used to be carried around in tankers with screw tops on them around sites, and one of the bonuses for the British was, particularly on the island of the United Kingdom, it didn't take up a lot of space. It wasn't massively dangerous. You can talk, or if you look at documentaries about the work on this, they will tell you just how easy it was to handle. It's the same as hair dye or hair bleach. So we're coming now. This is a massively high arc. If I was really clever, I'd actually edit this, but I quite like this. This is our first launch into space, suborbital. I quite like the fact that we're seeing it. So this would be the first craft. This would definitely defeat the Americans and the Russians, I think, on this. Although there's actually evidence before that, we won't get into it. Yeah. Now I did say, re-entry. That's painful, and the whole thing's going to burn up. Is it? It's going to just. Oh no. Survive. I should have put a parachute on it. Now, I have mentioned the fact we're going to use these engines all the way through, but it's important to remember the British also did get hold of the A4 engines. From Germany. They got like a number of them, and there is evidence that, for example, I think 4 of them were used in flights shortly after the war where other Allied members were allowed to visit them. I've probably mentioned that earlier, but they did actually have the technology to break them down and look at them. It was a conscious decision not to use them because of the level of cost and complexity involved in them, and I think that's quite interesting. It's quite endearing. As we hit the ground. Oh, well, we won't be getting that back. Right, onwards and upwards. So, after a successful flight, we have got a load of science coming up now, and it is just a case of identifying what we really want to get. I'm going to try and steer away from using any of the American and Russian engines. I can't say I won't use them. I have installed a mod that allows me to make sort of my own engines later on, but at the moment we're going to stick with the gamma engine. We're going to try and do as many missions as we can with that. And you'll see, as I start to choose my next set of missions, let's see what happens in the next episode.